Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this next session. I'm very excited to be able to welcome the founder and chairman of Tofurky here at the VEGPRENEUR Summit, Seth Tibbott. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Seth, you are one of the early pioneers of what we call alternative protein, alternative meat. Can you tell us your story a bit? I know it involves you living in a treehouse at one point, so I think I'd love to dig into that first.
Yeah, sure. So I started Tofurky, or what was to become the Tofurky company was actually called Turtle Island Soy Dairy in 1980. December of 1980, I had been a naturalist and teacher in the Portland public schools, and I had saved up 2,500 bucks in my teaching career at that point. And I had been to a place in Tennessee called The Farm, which was a hippie commune of 1,200 pure vegetarians, they called it. And they were living on 1,600 acres of land and farming a lot of soybeans. And that's where I learned from them about tempeh. They were vegans at the time, but the word vegan wasn't even in the lexicon then. And I was living in a tent teaching high school kids about the outdoors. And I took back some of the tempeh starter and I made tempeh in Tennessee, which is a lot like Indonesia, where tempeh is from. And I fermented my first batch of tempeh, and wow, I was just blown away because it was so much better than any meat alternative that I had had. I had been vegan for a while then, and just having this delicious high protein food made me think this is going to be explosive growth, and it's going to be follow the path of granola, which you could only find in the head shops around my college town in Ohio in the 1970s. And then I went back to that same town 5 years later, and boom, here's granola all over the supermarket. So with that in mind, I started making tempeh at a local co-op where I rented the kitchen at night, and I could make 100 pounds of tempeh in 8 hours. So started delivering it to stores in my beat up old Datsun station wagon. And I had about 10 accounts in Portland, and I was able to make roughly 200 pounds a week. I soon got a distributor after 2 months that wanted 1,000 pounds a week. So I went looking for a place to make the tempeh and found an old school building that was abandoned up in the mountains, about 70 miles from Portland, Oregon. And I convinced the school board to rent me this building that had a gym and a beautiful commercial kitchen and 4 classrooms for 150 bucks a month. So that served as the incubator, so to speak, of my new business for 10 years. And it was, during that time, I was losing money really for the first 15 years of business. And I didn't start making money until after Tofurky happened, which was 1995. So there was 15 years there. They were pretty lean years. So I had to figure out how to survive while the market caught up to my dreams and while I figured out the ins and outs of business, because I had no real business acumen or experience. So that's when I found 4 trees up there at a neighbor's land, and she rented me the trees for 25 bucks a month. And boom, I built a 3-story tree house that was home for 7 years. And then I pivoted in 1995 to start the Tofurky company. So that's where all the magic started happening, and we became a business from really what was a cottage industry and keeping me alive, but very minimally. And, my wife always says, like when I got married in 1992, they always ask her, did he make you sign a prenup? She goes, prenup? I had a house. This guy lived in a tree. I had insurance, I had a job, And so she didn't marry me for my money. So that was it. But it was really pivoting to Tofurky that changed the course of my life and made us profitable. It was what I call my 20-year overnight success story.
You made some very specific decisions. It sounds like when you started Turtle Island, you are a B Corp. You have, to my understanding, never given away any equity. It's all family owned. Can you talk a little bit about, did that just happen on its own, or you went into this knowing you wanted to build a B Corp family owned business?
Yeah, well, first of all, in 1980, there was no real venture capital market. There was no real investment bankers knocking on my door. And if there was, they weren't really interested in this plant-based space because the plant-based space really didn't exist in grocery. I mean, it existed in a very infancy in natural food stores, but it wasn't in supermarkets. You couldn't find anything plant-based in supermarket except maybe Oreos, which were accidentally vegan. So we grew bit by bit. I mean, every year that we were losing money, we were still showing growth. And when we got to the point when Tofurky came along and we started to get noticed and getting offers to sell equity, I had seen so many passionate plant-based entrepreneur companies sell their business and just watching the business crater and die, mainly because the people that were running the big corporations that were buying these businesses didn't have a clue about how to market plant-based foods yet. That's really changed right now, and I think it's a much more sophisticated market. But having that experience of just growing bit by bit and doing every job in the business from janitor to production worker to CEO and salesman, it really gave me a lot of background and a lot of empathy for how hard it is to make food, and I think made us a better company. But right now, it's Tofurky does stand out because I think we're probably the largest independent family-owned company in this space. And we have never sold any equity, like you said, outside the family. But we're having conversations now about like how we should handle this because the market has changed so much. And we're seeing the hockey stick growth in plant-based foods now. In our space, refrigerated plant-based foods are up 128% year over year. And that is incredible. Like, for reference, if a grocery store shows 2% growth, they're thrilled in all food in a grocery store. So the conversation now, it's, when you see a category that's growing by 128%, it's easy to go in there and say, hey, look what's happening in this category. And they're like, yeah, right, I'll take a chance on your product because it's growing at much faster rate than all food. So easier to get space in that sense. But on the other hand, we're going against people with much larger, marketing budgets like Beyond and Impossible. Those guys have a bigger marketing budget than our total gross revenue, which is, amazing. So we're just trying to figure it out. And you've always got to look at your key assumptions in business. And that's what we're doing now.
What catalysts do you think have led to where we are right now in terms of the plant-based revolution? What role did entrepreneurship specifically play in getting to where we are today?
Oh, it's just huge because plant-based foods, when there was no market for it, it was all based on these passionate people like myself that had this vision of something that wasn't there and that no it flew under the radar basically of these large food companies. And at first, they were very dismissive of it and thought this is just a fad. You actually still see some of the more backwards corporations thinking that it's just a fad that's going to go away. But, you know, um, entrepreneurs are basically misfits, and they see things that others don't, and they're willing to take a chance. So this whole industry has been founded by a bunch of misfits, or as Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia says, juvenile delinquents, kind of. And I think that that's the exciting thing. It's very exciting to um, pioneer something and to be placed in something that's going to be incredibly bigger in the future. You get the dream you prepare for, and right now the future is screaming for more plant-based options. So the timing couldn't be better. I mean, I was a little bit ahead of my time by a decade or two, I guess, but it's still not too late to get in and be part of this jet stream of plant-based foods, like 128%. Wow.
So Tofurky doesn't make just Tofurky. I see that you've entered other categories. You're doing hot wraps, I believe. Are you getting into dairy free as well?
Yeah, that's correct. We just actually on Thursday launched Mucho Cheese, which is a new brand we have some shreds that we've been working on cheese for like 5 years. And this is like a fava bean based cheese. And it's a new, a lot of the cheeses now that are on the market are older formulations. So this is like a new formulation of cheese. It's really amazing, and has great stretch and melt, and is getting rave reviews from buyers. So we're excited about that. But yeah, cheese is one of those real jet streams now, and it's come such a long way. From the 1990s was the first cheese that I ever saw. And back then, oh boy, not so good. The big joke used to be, did you hear about the fire in the vegan cheese factory? And the answer would be no, but the cheese was fine the next day. It didn't even melt, So those days are gone, and we're seeing melt now. But cheese is still a very young category, vegan cheese. So I think in the next 20 years, there's going to be incredible new products that we'll see that really match up a lot closer to some of the more artisan, like there's no great, for instance, really sharp cheddar cheese on the market that I've tried. And I think that we'll see more innovation in cheese. So that would be one great place for plantrepreneurs to start up businesses. And I've been amazed at what I know Miyoko's going to be on later. She's amazing. And I was an early investor in that company and just think the world of her and what she's done. So yeah, cheese is happening.
You mentioned earlier, and probably half jokingly, that you don't have any business acumen, which I would disagree with. What role did mentors play in your success?
Oh, huge. Like when I first started out, I went to a free seminar from the Small Business Administration, and there was this guy comes out. He was the ex-president of Louisiana Pacific Timber Company, and there was this big room full of entrepreneurs, and he starts out his lecture going, how many of you guys are out here to save the world? And I go, yes, this guy gets it. That's me. And I raise my hand and I look out, and there's 100 people behind me that are just like, what's that guy doing raising his hand? And then he goes, I thought so. How many of you are here to make money? And everybody is like, woohoo, that's me. So I didn't really have um, the background. And when I look back at that, I think that nobody got that question right, because the real answer should have been you should have raised your hands for both, because that's one of the real superpowers of vegan entrepreneurship is that every vegan brand, all the way up from a small little startup at your local farmers market selling tempeh to Beyond and Impossible and these big publicly traded guys, they're all the superpower is there's mission built into the DNA of every vegan entrepreneur brand. I've yet to see any vegan entrepreneur brand that didn't have this mission at heart. And if you have mission at your heart, you're going to stay in business. You know, if I had just been in this for money after 5 years of making $300 a month, I would have quit. I would have never stayed on. Like, who, you know, just say, well, this is obviously a failure, so I'm going to move on to find something more profitable to do. So Tofurky would have never happened, you know, and it'll get you, the mission will get you to your Tofurky moment. I think because the longer you stay in the game, you're just hanging around, you're learning and you're becoming what I've called in my book, less stupid, you know, and as you shed stupidity, you learn new ways to succeed. And that's why vegan foods are really going to be powered, you know, and why we've stayed around so long is we have this mission, you know, our mission is to veganize the world. And that's a big job. And we need all brands on deck in order for this to happen. It's way bigger than one brand. People are like, are you afraid of, you know, Impossible and Beyond? No, I'm not afraid. You know, it's easier to place products, like I said, in a category that's hot and happening than one that's cold, because we've been in business 40 years and we've been through times that were really, you know, where the space was shrinking actually for plant-based foods. And it's hard to go in there and talk to buyers and say, oh yeah, the reason that you are shrinking in your categories, you don't have Tofurky. They're like, oh God, you know, you're the fifth person today that said that. So really good to have strong brands in the category, creating noise. And, you know, we're still, even with this 128% growth, we're still a very small fraction, 1% of animal-based protein. So really need the startups, the big companies, the little companies, everybody. It's all hands on deck. We got to save this planet.
Well said. How do you see your relationship, and maybe you can go a little deeper with some of the other newer companies since you've been around? What do you see yourself as a mentor? Are you? I see that you're investing.
Yeah, I mean, well, my stepson Jamie, who's running the day-to-day operations as president, doing a great job. He and I both enjoy working with these smaller companies and the startups, just because you know, that's near and dear to our heart. And you know, to your question before, I really didn't answer was, you know, I had mentors too. I had this one guy that started Cascadian Farms frozen food that I think is owned by Kraft or somebody now. And he told me at a show, he said, oh man, I lost so much money for so long. And now he turned it around. And this is in the midst of me losing money. And I was like, oh man, this guy lost money. He turned it around. That was cool. You know, Al Jacobson was a mentor to me. He started the Garden of Eden, and he was just this crazy, really fun-loving guy that stood out from all the other sort of button-down business people and gave permission to be more creative and everything. So, yeah, we have a Tofurky Family Foundation, and we want to support good causes, but because a lot of the nonprofits are out there, they're the unpaid marketing arm of Tofurky and all of this growth that we're seeing now in the corporate world. So we want to work hand in hand with nonprofits, but we also really value the startups. And I know that through the Plant-Based Foods Association, we've been paired up with several different companies, and that's like a real joy for me, is just helping small brands succeed all over the world. And that's what's happening right now is, veganism is on the march, not just in the US, but everywhere.
What is your most recent factory, I believe, is incredibly energy efficient.
Mhm.
What value do you put on that? I know that you innovate when it comes to packaging as well.
Yeah, so we built it, we broke ground in 2011 for a new, well, it was built to LEED platinum standards, have 400 and something solar panels on the roof, recycled wood and everything everywhere, free electric car charging. Um, we love, our biggest footprint is obviously making vegan foods, because nothing trumps, just the efficiency of making plant-based foods. But doing it in the most ecological way with, our energy efficiency is 40% more than a normal factory in Oregon. And, we're harvesting rainwater and just recycling everything that we can. And it's just an amazing plant, really. I think one of the few food plants. It's very hard with food to get like a LEED platinum certification because of all the energy that you're using. But these guys, and this was a lot of Jamie's work too, have we've been able to do that. And along those lines, as you mentioned before, we are a B Corp, which I really think other vegan entrepreneur companies should really consider, because it really, all companies say, yeah, we're good to the community, we're good to our employees. Well, the B Corp goes in there and goes, well, let's put some teeth in that. Let's see how good you are to your community and your employees. And then there's this huge process and checklist that you get for doing different things in the community and for your employees. So, and we like to network then within the B Corp community, to find other B Corps that we can work with. We had a Tofurky ham that's amazing, that came out a couple years ago, and we're linked up with a local B Corp brewery in Portland, and we made a beer glaze for that. That's really amazing. So those kind of connections are really worth a lot to us, and wanting to be good to our employees and the community, because why should you be in business if you're not?
Agreed. Can you talk maybe about a failure, something that didn't go as you planned?
Oh my God. How much time do we have? Uh, but, basically the whole first 15 years of existence were one failure after the next in terms of the business. Although, the dream was growing, but the business was failing. But, what failures often are a product of the scaling up products from benchtop to actual, production is always like a crazy process. And for instance, right towards the end of the tempeh focus, I mean, we still make tempeh. I love tempeh, but we were 100% making tempeh for these 15 years. And so after really struggling on tempeh, I decided what we really needed was this flavored tempeh. And I still believe in flavor on tempeh and flavor on everything. But we had these tubs, and we put different marinades in there. and we cubed the tempeh and we sat it in these tubs and we tested it, and oh man, it was really good. Like, because people, it takes out the step of people having to marinate tempeh. Tempeh doesn't have any salt, in it. So some people like that, but other people want more flavor. So we thought we were onto something, and we had three different flavors. We took it to a show, and we called the whole line KISS. Keep it simple, stir fry, because that's what we wanted people to do, is stir fry it. Cool name, cool logo, everything. It was like great, but it got out there, and the problem was the longer it soaked in this marinade, it just really, really accepted the marinade, and it became squishy. The texture was changed, and it just became way too salty. And I mean, we sold a bunch at first, and then it gradually just declined. So that was something, that we should have caught beforehand, but sometimes you miss stuff, and especially in that scale up process. But my book has many more failures, and you're going to fail. Every great undertaking is going to have shortcomings, and not going to bat 100%, but it's part of the yoga.
Yes. How do you go about building your team and making sure that your team members are aligned with your core mission?
Well, that's interesting because, for instance, a lot of people, they go, well, you do have all vegans working at your plant, and we're going, hey, we're in a community of 5,000 people, and if you look at the number of vegans, we don't even, there's 200 people, over 200 people in our factory now. And if we were just working with vegans, we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't be able to fill all those jobs. So, but a lot of people that have come to work there, and we're always having Meatless Mondays. On Thursday this week, we had this to celebrate the launch of the cheese. We had a pizza truck come in and give everybody these amazing cheese pizzas. So there's been a real, well, the most common thing is people becoming from meat eaters to flexitarians and reducing their meat. But there's also been a lot of vegans that have come. They weren't vegan when they started working there, but they became it when they had. So I think that's sort of the process of instilling values, and then they see, the B Corp and the value when we're giving everybody free healthcare and dental and 401ks. Everybody has a 401k. A lot of these people that are working production, they don't know what a 401k is, and they're like, "What? What do you mean?" Like if they leave to go somewhere else, they're like, "What do you mean? I have like $50,000 in the bank?" And so it's really just a process going forward.
You're doing great work. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Tofurky evolving over the next 5, 10 years? What would you like to see it look like?
Yeah, I'd like us to continue to innovate. I think that's one of the challenges as a mature brand, and as you grow, sometimes you become too conservative in, like when you're smaller, it's easy to just go, hey, I'm going to take a flyer on this. And I would like to see us revert more back to that and really take on some challenging new categories. That there's still plenty of room for true innovation, which is not like, the cheese, there's already cheese out there. So we're just basically saying, we have what we think is a better version of what's out there. And that's one way to grow. But I think that, like Tofurky coming along, there was no sales data that said, oh, plant-based vegan turkey is going to be the next great thing. So going beyond where the sidewalk ends is where innovation really is. Like, doing something that nobody else has done. And I would like to see innovation in tempeh, to be honest. You know, tempeh is growing at 40% right now, which is big, but the category, like I said, is growing at 100 something percent. Although tempeh is, you know, a mature kind of category. I mean, it's been around since the 1980s now, so it's not like a hot, sexy young thing, but it needs to grow beyond just the cakes of tempeh. It needs to grow into flavors. You know, in 1975, Bill Shirtliff, who wrote the book of tempeh, the book of tofu, he and his wife took off around America and in a van, and they did cooking classes in like 40 cities all over the country. And they showed how to make good tofu dishes and how to make tempeh dishes in these cooking classes. At the end of the class, he always asked, who liked tofu better? Who liked tempeh better? He said, tempeh never lost. Like when you know how to cook tempeh and the texture and flavor is there, it's amazing. But people, because it came on after tofu, people still don't know all the secrets of cooking tempeh. So there needs to be flavored, value added tempeh. I think tempeh is still, you know, just the healthiest thing that we make. I mean, I love tempeh, and I just feel so damn good when I eat tempeh. And I've been working with some tempeh burgers every day for lunch this summer. Practically, I've been grilling these tempeh burgers, and I love the taste of Beyond Burgers, Impossible Burgers. I eat them. You know, we have a plant-based burger that I think is amazing, but when you eat a tempeh burger, you just feel stronger and lighter. And I don't know. I think that there just needs to be more experimentation and innovation with flavor. So I'd like to see that, and just, you know, a lot of other meat substitutes that really haven't been fully explored, and give people more reasons to not eat meat.
Given that you were such an early pioneer, did you ever face any pushback from regulatory authorities or the meat industry in your for your products being labeled, you know, meat substitutes or plant-based or vegan?
Um, you know, what did Gandhi say? First they laugh at you, then they ignore you, then they fight you, then you win. So it was mostly in the early days ignore. Like, who wants to bother to swat a little mosquito of a category as this? So we didn't get a lot, but you know, when Tofurky came on, we sure did, and we got both laughter and derision and fight now. So Tofurky has sued 2 states now, and we've got others queued up which we'd like to sue. But we've actually done well with these suits in Arkansas and Missouri, especially Arkansas. So that's a sign of winning. Fight is one step from winning. So we're really happy to do that. But really, you know, in the early days, it was really just not even understanding, like, what, you're making moldy soybeans. It's like my Aunt Rosie, and when I first started my business, she said, you know, she took me aside. She's like Midwestern aunt. She was like, Seth, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Like, this is a meat eating country. It's always going to be a meat eating country. And this is like 1980 Christmas, like right when my idea is at its most primitive, and I'm still trying to talk myself into spending money and time making tempeh. And here's somebody telling you, you know, what a foolish idea it is. Like, that's when I think more businesses have been lost through lack of faith by the entrepreneur or somebody talking you out of it than money or any other reason. So, you know, that's kind of the sticking point for a lot of things.
So we have our first audience question. This is from Cece. She says Tofurky is such a uniquely branded company that has a sense of humor and alternative vibe to it. The new cute characters on some of your packaging really stand out on the shelf. Did buyers ever try to get you to change or not take you seriously?
That's a great question. Thanks, Cece. And yes, you know, buyers are the gatekeepers, and coming in there with a product with humor, they don't see that every day. So that we see humor as a common human element that once you share a laugh with somebody, you're like bonded. And what we saw in the early days, especially going out to the stores, was once we got on the shelf, customers got it, and they like, this is great, because vegans, let's face it, we can be pretentious sometimes, or come across that way, or be perceived as that. So the laughter took some of the edge off of that, but it was challenging, especially in the early days, to get through the gatekeepers. But once we got through the gatekeepers and got to the shelf, they were like, oh man, give me more of this. So it cuts both ways as a humor. I did have I was interviewing public relations firms. At first in Tofurky, it was such a wild idea that, for the first 10 years, we didn't hire any public relations firm because it was just naturally like the leaves would turn gold in the fall, and the calls would start coming in from the major media outlets, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Tonight Show, Today Show, everything. But then I was interviewing these public relations agencies, and this one gal, she opened up with, the first thing you got to do is change your name. And I was like, really? You're leading with that? That's your lead? And I said, well, I don't think I need to hear much more. But that sticks out as a memory of somebody that really wanted to change the name. Buyers were just like, they would just be like, no, it's too crazy. But then you'd go to their competitor and you'd show the sales numbers, and they're like, okay, maybe I was wrong. But I think humor is underutilized in marketing of plant-based foods, especially. But you look at, car commercials, like beer commercials, there's humor in advertising. But that was one of the secrets in '95 when we first named it Tofurky. Nobody wanted to name it Tofurky because they thought, oh, that's too stupid. Let's name it something like holiday stuffed tofu roast, and just didn't have the same ring as Tofurky. So I think that it's still that way. I think that using humor is very important, and it's a great tool in your tool bag to have. So be funny.
We have a question from Rasha. How do your products do outside of tofu overseas, particularly in countries that have a more soy-based diet, such as Japan or China?
Japan haven't had a lot of success in. We have some success there and haven't tackled China. Right now with the dollar being so strong, it's really a struggle to get to the right price point. But we've been very successful in the UK, in Australia, Canada, Mexico. So we have been able to overcome that. But Asia is still something waiting to happen. Some of those countries have different flavor profiles, and they don't eat like some of our core products are like the deli slices and sausage. You don't have those sort of same flavor profiles, for instance, in Japan. And I'm not knowledgeable enough about the market in China, but I do think that those countries can be approached, but it just is way down on our list. We have so much demand in this country and other countries that want the products that it's going to be a while before we can create, for instance, a special product for those markets that aren't like just naturally in tune with our sort of diet and flavor profile.
Prasheen asks, we have seen a lot of plant-based meat companies go after quick service restaurants. Why is grocery retail lagging behind?
Well, I would dispute that retail is really lagging behind. You do get, I mean, I think it's great that the market is expanding to include offerings in food service and in these fast food places. But I mean, we're sold in 27,000 stores all over the world, and retail has been an amazing segment, especially now that with COVID, of course, like the one category that's down for us right now is food service. We had to pivot because we were going to make a big push ourselves in food service this year, but with the lack of the restaurant trade, showing such weakness, we haven't done that. We had to pivot into other ways of finding growth. So I think it's really the opposite. In my experience, has been that the food service channel, and right now it's still, I would argue, lagging behind, because what is happening in food service is really just burgers. They're not buying, like, for instance, I mean, there is KFC in Canada that's doing a chicken right now, which I think is really cool. But for the most part, it's all burgers. And that's the way that category has been for eons, ever since I first, got involved with this. Garden Burger was the first burger, excuse me, that I saw make a footprint in food service. So food service needs to expand beyond the burger, which if you go into a grocery store, you can buy deli slices, sausage, hot dogs, everything. You can buy burgers too, but I think food service is behind more than retail.
You mentioned earlier that there's still space for innovation, true innovation. Where do you see opportunities for entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting a food business right now that you think are unaddressed?
Well, I think steak hasn't been done, and beef is the absolute worst greenhouse gas perspective, product from greenhouse gases. So I think a steak with a nice texture and flavor really needs to happen. I think that lamb is the other real bad greenhouse gas. So beef and lamb are really out there that I think can happen. And I would say, just improvements in, incremental improvements of products. Like we can do better at, sausage. We can do better at our roast. We can make changes. So but there's still, I would say those two areas are really areas that I think of that really need to happen. There's this great restaurant in London called What the Pitta that makes a doner, which is a Turkish burrito, basically. And these guys do a lamb that's incredible. They were named the #1 kebab in London, like, versus not just the best vegan kebab, but the best kebab. So I think it's possible to do a good lamb and a good beef. There's so cutting edge flavor companies now that can do anything. Like this one flavor company I know at one time called me up and said, "Do you want camel?" I'm like, "Camel? People eat camel?" I didn't know that. So there's everything. But, when you're developing new products, the thing you've got to remember most is taste is king, value's queen, everything else is marketing. Like there's all these great reasons that we as vegans know, from the environment to the compassionate and nutritional values even, but taste is the key to the human heart. That's the portal. And if it doesn't taste yummy, good luck selling it on any of the other key core reasons. So remember that taste, to highlight taste in your marketing and in your development of products. So, first rule about Fight Club: don't talk about Fight Club. Talk about taste.
I think there's one last question we can have here for you tonight. I think this is a great one from Michaela. Do you have a moment in those first 20 years where you felt like it was never going to work for you? What made you decide continue trying?
Oh my God, that's a great question. Yeah, the one moment that I can really think of. So in 1989, I had been in business 10 years, and I had yet to achieve my goal of making $1,000 a month. I mean, I was still living on $300 a month. I was living in a tree, which I loved. And so I started thinking, this is not going to ever work. And but by living in the tree, I was getting all these letters and cards from around the world. I have a tree house too. I can't believe it. You live in a tree. And I was like, there's no treehouse book. And so I said, man, that would be a lot more fun than making tempeh would be, flying around the world and taking photos and collecting stories of these treehouse owners. So I tried to pivot out of making tempeh into tree houses, basically. And everybody thought, unlike tempeh, which people like Aunt Rosie says is a terrible idea, everybody I talked to was like, oh, that's a great idea. There's no treehouse book. This is a sure winner. And so I started going around and I was filming these tree houses in Florida and all over the country. And I started going to these places and these guys would go, hey, you know what? There was somebody just here last week that was also filming tree houses. And I was like, oh, really? And so my great idea turned out to be one, sometimes when you have a great idea, somebody else has probably got that idea, but it's the idea that people say, like Aunt Rosie, like, that's a stupid idea. You might go, maybe this is a good one. But I tried to write the book, and I wrote this big proposal up and sent it out to a couple publishers, and nobody wanted it. And so I was like, well, I guess we're back to the tempeh mines. So thankfully, that failure had it, but I was pretty depressed, to be honest, and really didn't see my life trending in any kind of, profitable, impressive way. I thought I'd just be making a little tempeh, and I don't know what else would happen. Maybe I would find something else to do down the road, but it was fortuitous to fail in that situation, because I couldn't have done both. And being all in, you have to be all in on something. If like, for instance, if I had said, oh, I'm just going to dabble on this, and then the treehouse book takes off, it would have taken a lot of attention away from tempeh and probably killed it eventually, because it was a good idea. And the guy, Peter Nelson, wrote this amazing treehouse book and did probably a better job than I could anyways. So he has a whole business now. He goes around building $1 million tree houses for people. So, sometimes failure can be a very good thing, which it was in my case.
Where can we see a picture of the treehouse?
Go to tofurky.com/book, and you can see this film on the treehouse, and it takes you up there to the treehouse as it stands right now. It needs a lot of renovation. It's basically a squirrel condo now, but it's still up in the tree, and it's not on my land, but I'm talking to the landowner about renovating it right now. So hope to renovate it, in the coming years. That's one of my goals. So we'll see how we can do that. But yeah, tofurky.com/book has a nice video that takes you right up into the tree and shows you this 3-story treehouse and photos. So check that out.
Amazing. Seth, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all your wisdom. We hope to have you back in the future.
Yeah, this is a great time, and I love that what you're doing is so fantastic, and I love all these vegan plantrepreneurs, amazing people, and you know, you're the future of the world. Literally, we got to save the world, and these guys are all doing it, and you're doing it, Noah. So thanks for bringing all of this together, and everyone's needed to band together, and we can do this, right?
Yes, we can.
All right, good.
All right. Thank you, Seth. I'll see you backstage. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.